Welcome and thank you for joining our panel discussion today. We'll start with an overview of the Infor Project Ledger with a focus on grant accounting. We've been fortunate enough to have been working with Infor FSM for a few years now and want to use this forum to discuss how the grant accounting process is enhanced within the Infor FSM solution. My name is Chris Gordon. I'm a senior finance consultant at RPI, and I've been part of this team for a little over 8 years now. We're joined today by Cindy Brackens and Bob Chrisman, two of our most experienced grant specialists. They've been working in this area for quite some time and are happy to share their experiences with us today. Along with us today, too, is Heather Wirt. Heather joined us in the spring of 2020 and brings real-world grant experience from her previous work life. She's filling an important role in an existing FSM grants implementation for a healthcare organization, and we look forward to hearing from her. Cindy, Bob, Heather, would you mind just saying hi real quick?
Hello.
Hey there.
And Cindy, you're coming to us from Asheville, right? Your hometown?
I am. I'm coming to us from Asheville, North Carolina. I've been with RPI also for near 8 years. Been consulting for 20 years and worked in healthcare prior to that for almost that long.
Beautiful. And how about you, Bob?
I'm coming to you from Houston, Texas. I've been at RPI for 9 years, working with Infor Lawson products for 21 years, and was also in healthcare prior to that.
Very nice. And Heather, you're the raven in the background's giving you away where you're coming from.
Yeah, I'm in the Baltimore office, and prior to coming to RPI, I worked in healthcare for about 8 years.
Fantastic. Well, thank you all for joining. I know we're kind of all scattered throughout the country, but we appreciate you logging in today and being part of this discussion. Cindy, before we jump into Project Ledger specifics, could you kind of just provide an overview of the feature functionality that the system provides?
I'm happy to. For those of us who are current Lawson/Infor version 10 users, we're familiar with activity management, or the latest name I think is project accounting. CloudSuite's offering is called Project Ledger. It has much of the same functionality, but it has been amped up, I think, to include some other supplemental components, such as the BR module and the grants management module. The biggest difference to note is that now we only have one global ledger transaction instead of a separate GL transaction and a separate AC transaction, which always required us to do some sort of reconciliation to ensure they stayed in balance. So that's probably the biggest difference, and the I guess the biggest switch for people to get their head around to understand how Project Ledger works. I think Heather's going to detail some of the functionality of the Project Ledger for us next.
Yeah, absolutely. So in addition to what Cindy just went over, the Project Ledger gives you the functionality to identify and track a variety of projects, anything from an instruction externally funded grant. You can create and track budgets, invoice directly on projects, control ineligible expenses, create encumbrances, implement salary cap limitations, and allocate your labor costs, all within the Project Ledger now.
Beautiful. Heather, could you share an example of how some of our grant-funded clients have used the Infor Project Ledger to meet some of their business requirements?
Yes, so I'm working with a hospital and medical center right now that receives a variety of funds. Federal, state, local agencies, all with various grant requirement reporting, and so they're able to track expenditures, do reporting, do all their labor distributions, their effort certifications, all within the project module now.
Great. So that's kind of like a healthcare specific example of a grant funded client leveraging Project Ledger. Bob, I know you've worked in healthcare for a long time, but most recently kind of outside of that industry too. Do you mind kind of sharing how that functionality isn't just specific to an industry, but you've kind of seen it in different?
Right. So I'm working with a transportation industry client, and their needs are a little bit different than healthcare. Get a huge chunk of their money from the Federal Transportation Administration, and every one of their projects requires a local match. So they're using the functionality within Project Ledger to allocate invoices between the federal grant and the local funds. So they're taking advantage of some of that new feature functionality that didn't exist in Lawson VR, and it's working very well.
Great. And just kind of on topic here too, COVID obviously hit, over a year ago, and the CARES Act was passed in the spring of 2020 to provide economic stimulus in the wake of COVID. Is the Project Ledger a good way for clients to track these types of funds and how they're spending things? And do you have any client specifics that you might share you've seen over the last year?
Yeah, I'll field that one for the start of that conversation. And client is just setting up a project and a contract and a grant, and they've linked them together, and they can decide what expenses to allocate to that grant very easily, and they have good visibility and reporting on their spend against that grant at any time, and then they're also able to generate an invoice as part of their federal draw, and there's just a greater ease of doing all of that in Project Ledger.
Chris, can I chime in here?
Yeah.
I don't have a grant-funded example per se, but I have a very basic use of Project Ledger that I've seen, where a healthcare organization, they needed to accumulate their COVID-related costs in an operational way. And typically, we categorize our supply costs, in different GL accounts, such as supplies, non-chargeable, patient chargeable, clothing, all those kind of things. And rather than creating additional GL accounts to track that information, they chose to just create some very simple, basic projects to accumulate those COVID-related costs. And it allowed them to still code to those same accounts that they're used to, and with their budget, which probably got shot to, the heck. But it gave them the ability to be able to track those COVID-related costs.
Great.
Yeah, so in addition to those examples, a client I'm working with has also received funds from the CARES Act. So they are tracking those all within the project module. In addition, they've actually gotten some research projects that they're using the project module to track those as well. So it's literally millions of dollars are being tracked through the project module just for COVID-related expenses.
That's great. Well, thank you all for sharing, different experiences in different industries, and obviously that all kind of depends on the client, so I appreciate that. So I remember when I first logged into the new Infor FSM system, I'm looking around, I'm looking for billing revenue recognition, the old BR system. I'm looking for grants management, the old GM system, and you don't see that anymore. So Cindy, would you mind help just clarifying that for people that might be listening, where those now live?
Certainly. No longer do we have all those separate systems. No longer do we have that GM system that some people had to purchase separately. Some people didn't even have or understand or know that it existed. It's all encompassing in the Project Ledger. So all of that functionality got baked into the Project Ledger in CloudSuite.
Great.
And I'll add to that. Back in Lawson, we had the BR module. We also had the grant management module, and then later on, they added a GM billing module that offered you the ability to have a single select. I don't believe a lot of clients were able to implement that. It was very federal grant specific, but what Infor has done is taken all that feature functionality, the nice things that existed in the BR module, and the things that existed in grant management and the grant milling module, and they brought them all together. And I think just for ease of transactions that come out of the project ledger, they brought forward the same system codes that we were used to seeing in Lawson. So, for example, the scene when you're doing salary encumbrances, the BR module system code is used when you're doing your invoicing and revenue recognition. Then, so that's just giving some familiarity back to our Lawson users as they switch over into Infor CloudSuite.
Yeah, sure. No, that's great. We appreciate that. I think just like having all that consolidated into one area is going to be helpful going forward too, where you don't have to, go do GM setup and BR setup. It's kind of all within Project Ledger, or just kind of sub ledgers within that almost. So that's great. So if I'm a client and I want to charge salary or wages to a project and conduct effort reporting in FSM, how do we do that? And maybe, Bob, would you mind speaking to the differences in this process between the old Lawson S3 system and the new FSM?
Sure. This is where Infor has really taken a significant improvement, at least in my opinion. Lawson approach is to get your labor distribution set in place before payroll ran, and that is the opposite now. So payroll, and it doesn't matter what payroll the client is using, it just posts as a journal entry to the general ledger, and then that becomes the source of your labor distribution going forward. And what I think we have the opportunity to change here is that in old Lawson, by having to do it before payroll, you're taking your best guess at how you thought someone was going to spend their time, and that often resulted in a lot of labor cost transfers. So we have that opportunity now to get more precise before we do our labor distribution. So in theory, we should be able to reduce the number of labor cost transfers that I know clients struggled with.
Sure. No, that makes a lot of sense. Are there anything else to add on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So in addition to kind of what Bob went over, there are features that have been built in. So you can send out mass emails to let everyone know when they need to go into the system and certify their effort. The same is true for recertification. So if someone had a change to their labor and needs to go in and recertify, you can push out email notifications directly to that person through the system. So this makes communication about the effort certification process much easier.
Great. Yeah, no, I've noticed a lot. Just, I've worked within a lot of the other financial systems in FSM, and there's like a lot of pre-built workflows and functionality enhancements that just didn't come standard with Lawson S3. So there's, these pre-delivered workflows, additional enhancements. What are some of the things that we've kind of helped our clients take advantage of within Project Ledger, whether that's, IDM or the workflows? Could you speak to that a little bit?
There's an Infor Go app that allows you to receive alerts right on your phone. This can help people quickly access information no matter where they might be. Another cool feature is users have the ability to request new projects now. So they can enter the information and submit the request for approval. So this takes the back and forth that some organization used to have to go through to get a new project established out of the process entirely. So it just makes it a lot easier, a lot quicker, and just a little bit easier to navigate.
Yeah, totally. I'm pretty familiar with those workflows. There's some within GL for requesting new accounts. There's a request new vendor functionality too within AP. So those are really helpful. It kind of keeps the origination of the request electronically stored in the system, the approval and routing of that request all stored within the system, and then creates that project when it's approved, and it creates the vendor when it's approved. So eliminates a little bit of the back and forth, like you mentioned, that occurs outside the system, and allows for all that to be maintained within the system, which is great. And while they are like pre-delivered and pre-built, you still can go in and customize or personalize that workflow to meet whatever requirements the client has, right? Either like if that needs to go to a team of people or to a different person based on certain criteria, we could always configure that into the IPA flow.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, Chris. Yeah, so you can set up who your approvers are and who that workflow goes to, so that it's going to the right teams and is going to the right people for approval and final submission.
Awesome. Cool stuff. Okay, Cindy, would you mind sharing your thoughts on the reporting capabilities within Project Ledger, and maybe kind of some of the enhanced reporting that Infor FSM delivers compared to what we've seen in the old Lawson S3 world?
Absolutely, I will. Project Ledger reporting is significantly enhanced from version 10. We had, some standard AC reports, AC 410, 480. That was pretty much it from a delivered perspective. We really didn't have a report writer tool either. But in CloudSuite, we have quite a few options to do some of that reporting. We have things called list views, which we'll explain a little bit more in depth in just a bit. We have some application reports, I guess is what I'm going to call those, that are delivered. They're standard. You get to create some parameters on those. Those are in the application. We also do have some BI reporting from the Project Ledger perspective, and we also do have CSF analytics reporting. I think we have some slides to go through to illustrate those different types of reporting.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
I think we're going to start with list views. I think you're going to present something on the screen.
Yeah.
I'll pass it back.
Fantastic. Thanks, Cindy. So that's a great overview. There's kind of different places to go to get information, whether it's a list view or jumping into BI or jumping into CSF analytics. And I think it might depend on the user too, where they would go and what they're looking to see. If it's an end user, list views might be kind of where they're living, but as we move up, BI first, CSF analytics might be more, be used more too. So you'll hear the term list views a ton, right? They're throughout the entire system, not just within grants management. And essentially, it's a way of looking at data in a specific view, allowing you to search and filter and add columns and personalize to your liking. So what we have here is kind of just like an overview of what's out there from the Project Ledger perspective. Each slide we have coming up here kind of just goes through a specific report that comes standard with Project Ledger. And keep in mind, as we're looking at them, and Bob's kind of talking through them, that you can add fields and do things to these to customize and personalize them. So I'll leave that there. I think, at the top of these slides, we have the specific query, I guess you could think of. And the bottom of the slide will show the data that comes from that query. And I guess, Bob, we'll just kick it off with the first one here, right?
Sure, let's do it.
Fantastic.
All
So
right.
the project obligations, what's this one showing us?
Yeah, tiny. But yeah. I think that, to me, that particular list view, rubber really meets the road. It's giving you a very quick snapshot of how you're spending against your budget, both your posted actual expenditures and your encumbrances and commitments, and just a kind of a brief definition of how Infor has changed. Commitments is requisitions essentially, and encumbrances are really everything else. Purchase orders that haven't posted yet, and so forth. Salary encumbrances would fall into that as well. So this is just a couple of things that I like about this is one, it just real time gives you immediate visibility on your spend. The other thing about list views in general is, as you had mentioned earlier, a different way I want to organize that screen, or if I need to add something to it, very easy to do now. And it doesn't take IT anymore to do it. It's really very easy, and the end user, it can very easily add and personalizes the term. And just to clarify that point, I guess, is personalizing is where I personally, looking at this view the way I want to see it. But if the organization feels like everybody ought to have a new column added, then you can use the configuration console and rearrange that page. It's a consistent look throughout. I might also add that this is a focus on the grant accounting piece in this discussion, but I think it's also much easier for a project manager who's maybe out in the field to know what they're doing at any point in time against their spend. So what do we got next, Chris?
Totally, yeah. And something also just to point out, Bob, like at the top of this screenshot, we have that BC-LTD query, more or less. And behind that, there's a specific reporting basis and specific parameters to render the data that we're looking at there. And you can have as many of those up top as you need, based on the different hierarchies or whatever you have built within Project Ledger.
That's correct. So you're not limited, and again, the end user can drive how they see the data and what specifically they want to look at. So it's just a real shift from, in the past where often you'd had to seek counsel from someone else. It's really at your fingertips now as the end user. Yep.
So moving on to the project variance report here, same type of format, and the bottom looks kind of similar, but I think, some differences there with that far column off to the bottom right there, showing the remaining percent of budget and things like that, right?
A lot of different slants on the same information, and then of course some of these additional slides you'll see is very, very specific. A bit of a challenge to get to. So one of the things I might point out on that variance slide is that you can go into your settings and color code them to make it easy to give that visual of how you're doing, if you're within an acceptable variance or not. And it's kind of that old red, green, yellow, and you're the one that decides what those parameters are.
Yep.
What's next?
Yes, so just draw on your eye to something real quick, which is nice, especially if you have a whole bunch of projects, and that setting's a nice feature there. How about the project period comparison?
Yeah, sorry, Chris, having a hard time seeing that one.
We can move on to the next one. This looks like it's a very similar to the first one before of
a trend, giving you a snapshot. I think what I like is of all the other ones, the one that I really like is the one talking about payables and invoices, and being able to just stay right within your own project ledger module and seeing precisely all the invoices that have posted against that project. And it's just like right there at your fingertips now, and there's no asking AP, there's no digging around, there's no reports you have to run like you would have to do in Lawson to get that information. And it's just a really nice view, and no more guesswork, no more having to drill around to try and find out what that is. It's kind of staring you right in the face.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, they give a lot of information kind of out of the box at the bottom here for the invoice lines, but like we mentioned before, you can pull in whatever other data that you want, whether that's going up to a vendor to bring in vendor addresses or whatever. All the business classes, most of the business classes can be related off of that AP line. So you're not just stuck with what's here, although that is very nice. You can always add to it. Any others that you want to touch on?
I think I'm going to stop here just because it's just a lot of different views, and I think it's important for people viewing to just understand that so much is now at your fingertips that just wasn't in Lawson. But I will add that on any list view, you can download the information that you're viewing into a CSV file or to a PDF file. Just you can very quickly and easily turn anything you're seeing on screen into a report.
Yeah. Okay, awesome. Well, then that kind of covers some of the list views out there. When it comes to Infor BI, that's a whole nother place to go to get information, to get some reports. What I'd like to do is just show a couple slides here related to the projects that you have set up. This is kind of more of a visualization of things, showing your summary level projects. You can obviously see green, red, based on budget and spend. We'll display different colors. If we drill into that community, the one that's showing red down there is way over budget. You can view the sub-items below that summary project. So we have cardiology, we have neurosurgery as two individual projects set up, and then spend and budget for each one of those visually represented. But if we take it one further step down and drill into one of them, we're now just looking at that specific posting project, general information about that project, the green representing your budget, your expenses, and the blue representing your budget down there. By month, you can change that time period with that little drop-down area on the right side. So just good visuals, the bottom, showing you different categories of your spend. And as we kind of go through to the budget section of this, you can just get that big red bar, hey, you've way overspent. Obviously, there's no budget there, so even a penny is going to go over. And then going one further step kind of up here in your panels to the categories, showing your breakdown by your account types. So your chart of accounts kind of comes over here, showing your assets, liabilities, revenue, and expenses, and how the spend lines up with that. Okay, we also mentioned CSF Analytics, another place to go to pull project reports to. We have an example here of a pretty decent looking report that comes delivered with the system, and showing your actuals, encumbrances, commitments, budget, and remaining. So very similar to what we're looking at in the list view, but this is in CSF Analytics, and might look more like a report that you'd want to print out, distribute, things like that, compared to a list view.
Chris, one thing to note about that in particular is it's in CSF Analytics, and so the ability to distribute that electronically to all your different PIs or grant managers or whatever is pretty much baked into that application. So that's kind of a good thing about the CSF Analytics piece.
Sure. Great. Okay, I think that's going to do it for our reporting here. One thing I do want to close with, just we kind of mentioned it earlier with some of the new feature functionality in FSM. One of those features is Infor Document Management, or IDM, and IDM can do a lot of things for us, from printing 1099 forms to actually producing a purchase order that looks nice that we want to email or send to a supplier. But I was curious, guys, is there any functionality within Project Ledger that can leverage IDM and help make the user experience with the system a little bit better?
The answer is yes.
The answer is yes. Infor has offered a number of templates that are driven through the Infor document management tool. One is a Project Ledger generated invoice. Another is a federal financial report that can be just immediately emailed out to the sponsor. Likewise with the Project Ledger invoice, and then there again, those those documents are there. It can be easily reprinted at any point in time, and can be modified to meet the sponsor or customer's needs or the client's needs.
Beautiful. Very, very nice stuff there. Okay, then I think that concludes our panel discussion here. I just want to thank you, Cindy, Bob, and Heather for joining us today. Thank you everyone in the audience for joining us too. I hope this has helped you start to visualize how your life in the new system in FSM would look and how you can benefit from the enhancements that we've hopefully conveyed to you, within Project Ledger. Before we close out here, I do want to just throw in a quick shout out here. We have a blog. You can access the blog by going to blog.rpic.com. A lot of cool stuff out there. So if you got a little bit free, you can go out and see what we're posting. And as always, reach out to us if there's any questions or you want to learn more about that. So with that, we will we'll open it up for questions.
Okay, looks like we do have one question here. How long does a typical project ledger implementation take? So I'll kind of give my best guess there, and then maybe Bob, if you want to provide some support too. But typically that's a 9 to 12 month implementation that goes alongside your general ledger implementation. Obviously that timeline can change and vary based on the extent to which you're implementing Project Ledger and all the different things that you plan to use and take advantage of, but that's typically what we've seen.
Yeah, I concur. That's the thing to point out there is you can use the Project Ledger for just managing budgets against your project, or you can go that extra step of implementing billing and revenue, labor distribution, effort reporting, grant reporting, those elements that will add a layer of complexity and possibly a little length in your implementation. And then again, volume has something to do with it as well.
Gotcha. Okay, I don't see any other questions. I think we're okay for right now. Again, appreciate everyone joining today. Appreciate your time, and again, thanks to Bob, Cindy, and Heather for being with us. If you have any questions, feel free to reach back out to us, but thank you all for joining.